Hi, this is Larry Greenblatt. Welcome to my CISSP 2020 exam tips. I want you to pass your exam, and you're going to do that by understanding the questions. That will really help. So I just had 8 students take the exam in the last week at 100% pass rate, and they all had some great feedback, and I want to share it with you guys to help you pass. By the way, I have a few things that I do. I teach CISSP, CCSP, CISM, and CRISP classes. I do pre-recorded boot camps, live online boot camps, and I do one-on-one half-day review sessions. And for more information on that, you can go to my website. All right, so the exam itself is, for the last few years, has been 100 to 150 questions, though in 2019, there were a number of my students were getting pass or fail with 151. Have not heard that yet in 2020. So, when they announce a change too, so they announced like a big change in 2015, they went from, 10 domains to 8, and then they announced the big one in 2018. There's much ado about nothing. They didn't change a lot. However, they're free to change without telling you. And I think you should assume that the exam is constantly being updated. And at least once a year. At least once a year, I believe they do that. So I haven't heard of anybody in 2020 get 151. Maybe that's just my experience, my sampling rate. You get 3 hours maximum. Oh, another thing about the exam that did, for me, it appears to have changed this year, maybe last year, was it used to be that if you got them all right, you passed with 100, and you don't remember the test being focused on any one domain, because that's the adaptiveness of it, right? So if you get a question wrong in business continuity or whatever crypto, then it asks you a lot of those. And then it seems like it was heavy in that area. But if you got them all right, well, starting, I think it was actually last year for me in March, I noticed students were passing with 100, but telling me that their exams were heavily focused on one thing. So a lot of people tell me it's heavily focused on SDLC, but not everybody. So I said, no, I passed with 100, dude, and I didn't get any. I got maybe 1 or 2. I got a lot of network. So that might be, not the news you wanted to hear, but that's, I got to share what I get. I got to tell you what I know. And you can't go back, and that's still true. But it's still the hardest part about passing an exam is, and I like to think that why my students have been very successful, is that I teach you more than technology years. I teach you how to understand people, how to understand requirements. Right? So if a system development lifecycle or software development lifecycle, an SDLC, is very heavily tested on this exam, let's start by saying the hardest part is understanding requirements. So I try to train my students to be, in some ways, the very friendly waiter who knows their menu very well. And when people come in, they don't always read the menu. They just say, hey, do you have this? And maybe you go, yeah, or maybe they use different words. Do you sell porterhouse? And you want to go, no, we don't sell porterhouse. You say, oh, we have a T-bone. I think that's the same thing, right? So the friendly waiter never makes fun of the guests, doesn't tell them they're ordering it wrong. A good waiter who wants to get tips, he wants to pass his exam, will show understanding. And sometimes you say that again. So I had somebody give me this sentence. If I asked you as a requirement to bring me a picture of a dog tied to a fence, you might at first take a picture of a dog and tie that to a fence. But if you stopped and thought about that, maybe that's not exactly what the guy meant. Now that I think about that, that doesn't really make sense. Who would want that? I told him that I saw an episode of Benny Hill where there was a couple and they were acting, and a woman just says her line. She reads, "What is this thing called love?" And the director says, "Cut." And it's, "What is this thing called love?" And they're different, So it's very hard. Now, I'm going to get to more about this understanding and technology and risk at the end. And I want to save that for one of my favorite engineers who I really think solved that problem. So I'm planting a seed for a great book that came out this year by Rana Al-Kayubi, Girl Decoded. But we'll talk more about that later. All right, so it's hard to understand a question. You're in test. You paid a lot of money to take this exam. There's people next to you. You couldn't sleep last night. Guys, you have to read it carefully. You can't uncook a steak. You've been to restaurants where the waiter got your order wrong. So take your time. You got to understand the scope of the question. The scope of a waiter trying to listen to a single customer. You might be taking an order for an entire company, but let's keep it simple in this one. It's just one person comes in and says, I want coffee and I want 2 eggs and whatever, bacon and, home fries. And all right, so we know a little bit about it. Did he say what kind of coffee he wanted? Because you might have like a really super duper coffee, actually put a shot of, uh, liquor in there, and that costs you whatever, $60. It's expensive liquor, but that's not what he asked for. My technical people tend to go out of scope. This is a governance test. Govern means to steer. It comes from the Greek, the kubernon, the helmsman of a ship. And whether you're steering a ship or a car, it is imperative that you watch where you're going. Any word like review, view is to see. Respect, spect is to see, as the spectacles. These are governance terms. For instance, in your near future, some of you might have a standard like AES. How will you configure it? Because it can go 128, 192, or 256. Is 128 going to meet your scope? Is 256 out of scope? When you're out of scope, you waste time and money. So I have 2 categories of people that take my exam. I have managers that tend to stress out because they don't know the technology, but they usually do well. Then I have technical people that think they know it all. But unfortunately, buying fiber optic cable might be better from confidentiality, integrity, and availability perspective, but all my patch cables are not going to do that because that would be way out of scope and a waste of money. Remember to solve the scope of a question as cheaply and as inexpensive or as quickly as possible. So when you think of setting scope, the CEO is a governance position and he sets the direction, and the COO is the executive management. He's the top level manager to make sure you're getting there without wasting time. And the CFO is an executive manager to make sure you're not wasting money. Because if they find out in an audit that, yeah, you met the scope, but you could have saved money and you went over budget, you're gone. Please don't look for the best technology. You meet the scope and don't assume. For instance, an organization, which of the following alternate sites would be the best option for an organization with proprietary equipment? Cold site, proprietary equipment? No, that won't meet the scope. Because proprietary equipment could become hard to get a hold of the day that there's a disaster. So I want to keep some proprietary equipment at an alternate site. That could be warm, hot, or mirrored. But it doesn't say, and it has to be up within 24 hours. The scope of this did not tell me that, and I don't want to waste money. The answer is bravo. On a CISSP test, don't look for 1 right answer and 3 wrong. C and D aren't wrong. It'd just be cheaper to do B, and that would meet the scope without getting in trouble with the CFO. By far, and I love it, the #1 feedback I get from my students, what really helped them, was not a technology. It was the concept of think before you act. I don't care if it's a split-second decision. You don't ready, aim, fire. I mean, you don't ready, fire, aim. You do ready, aim, fire, right? You ready, you aim, and then you fire. My smoke detector, you're going to hear actually, I might just turn it off. I have a Alexa with a Ring doorbell with multi-factor authentication. I know about the hacks that went on this year. And it goes off all the time. And I set it to don't alert me for anything that's outside of 15 feet, but trucks, not cars, trucks will sometimes set it off, whatever. So whenever you're placed in a situation, I understand, especially in forensics, some of you are going to be in a scenario where something went wrong. And 3 of the answers might be technologies you've never heard of, but they're all having you do them. They're wrong. The answer is the one that has you think. It's part of incident handling. It's a best practice. The most important step here, you're prepared for problems. Like we could have been better prepared for COVID. I don't want to pick on people. I just want to learn and get better. But we detect problems. And whether it's a COVID detector, a test that says we think you have the virus, they're not 100%. They're not 100% effective. As you go through these FDA requirements, the first test, is just making sure it's safety. More in CISSP, we would call that assurance testing. The functionality tests are in humans, and when it passes a phase 3 trial, it says, yeah, it's effective in a lot of humans, not 100%. My snort isn't going to pick up everything. We have false positives and false negatives. So when you detect a fire, maybe your smoke detector went off, first confirm, is it a fire? You analyze it, right? And maybe it is a fire. All right, should we evacuate the premises and activate the disaster recovery plan? No, not in this case, because it was burning popcorn. It was a fire, but it was contained. So make sure that you don't do things without thinking first, right? A firewall administrator notices an IP address on the inside appears to be attempting to open ports to an unknown host in a foreign country. What is the most appropriate next step to take? Don't do anything. Now, one thing I know, my memory is not great. I take exams. I took the cloud certification about this time last year. And when I got out of there, I remembered a couple of the questions. I didn't remember most of them. So if you want to remember stuff, write it down. You document and you analyze your findings. Do not do anything yet. I hear there's a half dozen questions like that. That's actually been a CISSP thing for many years. All right, do care when they want assurance. Now, I can tell you in a policy that something's true. Let me see if it really works, right? When you look at NIST has 3 basic ways in 853A to assess a network. You could observe, and this is what I saw written down. I watched people. You could interview people and just actively talk. Hey, what do you think? What would happen? But the most assurance is when you actually test it. It looks like your firewall does not block that. I just ran a packet on there. No, I just was able to get an IPv6 connection. I know you say you don't support IPv6. Problem is I'm measuring it. Griffin Space Tech, an asteroid mining company, wants to outsource its IT department. They're very concerned with system availability in the event of some disaster or disruption. Which of the following provides the best evidence? I want evidence, I want proof that a provider is able to meet the resiliency requirements. Well, just having a policy or updating a plan is good. I don't know that the plan was ever tested. Boy, B looked good, and then at least you're keeping it updated. The contract. No, D, that you've actually tested it. That's going to give you the most assurance. It looks like it does work. Turns out those drives aren't recoverable because of the file format. They're FAT32s and nobody reads it. I don't know. Now, sometimes there's multiple right answers. Try to at least flush out anyone that's not right. I can have 3 scales, and I get on one, it says I weigh 186 pounds, and I do around there. Yeah, okay, cool. And I get another one, it says you weigh 186.3. Ooh, wow, that's even more precise. The other goes, you weigh 150. I would like to see that, but that's not true. Actually, I'd be pretty scrawny, but I think 175. Yeah, so you flush out the things that are incorrect first, and then you pick the most precise ones. So, for instance, I drive a Honda CR-V EX, all-wheel drive. Well, Larry drives A, B, and C are all right. D is inaccurate. It's not a 4-wheel drive. So I can at least flush out D. So go with the most precise. And if you were to report, the guy seems to be wearing clothes. It's true, but that's not as precise as we need. Think of The Simpsons. Suspect seems to be wearing a hat. Anyway, which of the following is most true about digital signatures? Now, a digital signature is when you create a message digest of something, a hash, and then you encrypt that hash with the sender's private key. Now, the hash gives me integrity. Encrypting it with the sender's private key, which is their signing key, you might want to remember that, the signing key authenticates it. And anybody with the public key can say, oh, this thing wasn't tampered, and it really came from Bob or whatever. So A, hashing provides a way, it does, that's true. B, they allow a receiver to trust the authenticity. Yeah, that's exactly, they're true too. That's true too. C, data is protected from no, digitally signing thing doesn't. No, C is wrong. D, the signed information is likely not corrupted. That's the same as A. Nor spoofed, the same as B. Oh, D is better, right? Because it captures everything. Now, when we do things, we have to start somewhere and we go somewhere. That's a process. How do you get from here to there? We measure time in state, like, the beginning state, the end state, the current state, the desired state. You guys are taking your test. That's your desired state, right? So you do your planning. You do your due diligence during that. And when you read a question, try to figure out where they are. Where is this question? During the planning of a proposed solution to possibly. That's planning. Do all your due diligence. When I make a plan to drive somewhere, I'm governing the ship. I don't just make a map. I also want to figure out, the cheapest route. I want to make sure that I'm not paying too much for tolls or gas. And I also need to know the laws. There's a risk of getting a ticket. Our first laws, international shipping laws, and they're not easy to enforce. But it wasn't just steering away from the risk. Risk is literally cliffs under water. Rissos, it comes from the Greek. But you also, you might come to the port and you're like, all right, I avoided the cliffs. We were able to steer. We had the map. There's another ship right there. He wants me to turn around and go away because the way he's facing, I can't even get into port. I want him to go first. And they made laws. From now on, you're going to port. Everybody ports on the left side. They came up with protocols, So that's compliance. When you're doing things, I need to make sure you're compliant. And that's when you want your due diligence. Now, this is a very simple one, but more detailed in process management is, if I can say there's one area that most people say they get a lot of today, it's SDLC. But I just had one this weekend, said he didn't remember many. So I don't know for sure, but all SDLCs. Now, one of the first questions people say was, what is the SDLC? And I go, well, which one? There's a lot of SDLCs. You can look at anybody's SDLCs. How many steps are there? I don't know. What's the names of the steps? It depends on who you ask. Larry, what's the one the ISC Square uses? All right, guys, the ISC Square uses a whole bunch of them. In any SDLC, you always have 5 basic phases. Just make sure you get that. You're going to a restaurant. Maybe you're going for a company party and you got to plan on where you're going, how much you're going to spend, but figure the requirements really, basically, whether it's one and two together, you figured out what is it you're trying to develop. And then hopefully, that's the hard part. I said the hardest part of a development life cycle is understanding requirements. But once they finally get through the menu, I still don't see anything I like. Let me ask the waiter, do you guys make a... And then the waiter writes down what they think we'll do it. He designs the plan to build, I'll say maybe dev, maybe I'll say to dev, to develop what? To get them what, right? All right, so this is how we're going to do it, right? And the waiter writes it down, and then the cook has to cook it. The subject matter expert, the programmer, is going to, is going to build according to plan. He's going to follow plan. Hopefully he's following the plan. You got to verify that. You got to, wait a minute, that says, 2 teaspoons. I thought it said 2 tablespoons. All right. And then you're going to test it. Is this what? Is this, did we do it right? Now, there's all kinds of tests in your exam. You're going to have the, like an electrician testing electricity or whatever. But most important is that the cook likes the kitchen, or that they bring it out to you, and do you like the meal? And then you enjoy it. Now here it says maintain, but here actually I like to throw 3 phases here. There's really when you bring the food out, deploy, and that's exciting. Oh, but hopefully it's done right. Deployment can suck when you deploy an app and it didn't roll out right. You got to roll it back, or maybe somebody gets their main course and you still didn't get the appetizer, or they're bringing the dessert first. No, you can't do that. But hopefully we get that right. And then you use it, you operate the darn thing. You get to drive the new car. You get to use the new cloud-based server. Look at this, dude. No, it's so much faster now. You know what no one likes to do? To maintain it. Nobody likes to clean the kitchen. Everybody likes to eat food, but nobody likes to clean up afterwards. This is where most of our problems happen. There's a number of questions about that. That's where patch management comes in. That's where you got to do backups. You got to change your passwords and stuff like that. All SDLCs will follow that. And the ISC Square knows you're going to have a different SDLC in your whatever business continuity planning, where instead of requirements, you call it a BIA or something. Developers have just finished adding a new component to allow users to authenticate to an organization's enterprise resource planning, ERP. By the way, in 2020, I've heard no acronyms. I still can't confirm that, like even TCP or UDP, but whatever. Using an application programmer interfaces. Phew, APIs. Larry, I don't really know much about APIs. For federated identity solution. Oh my God, did we cover all that? Provided by a third party using PKI. One of my weeks. Oh, guys, this is really easy. The cook just cooked it. What happens next? Somebody goes over and checks the meal. Did he cook it right? When you develop code, they're building. Now, when you develop like a program in C, the code's going to be compiled. Nobody can see it once it's compiled. You can't decompile it. So we try to get the code reviewed first. Before you go cooking the steak, let me go check. Yeah. So yeah, the code should be reviewed by a third party. Right? Third party. Very simple question. CMMI, it changed a little bit. I hate what they did to level 2. I like the old term repeatable. Now they manage at a process level as opposed to quantitatively manage at an organization level. Whatever. As a musician, there are some songs I can't play. There are songs I'm in the process of learning. Some of them I just got done. And some of them I can repeat. If you can get to level 3, document your software development processes, guys, you are head and shoulders above the world. Most people do not have that. In fact, you get Carnegie Mellon to certify that that's true. Third-party certification, you'll brag about it on your website. Great. All right, it looks like we found the right company. I'd like you to do our development. How long will it take you to develop that app for me? Oh, I don't know. And can you tell me how much it'll cost? Yeah. You can't really manage something if you can't measure at least time and money. Now, I'll talk a lot about how difficult it is to measure security and stuff like that, but at least measure time, measure money. I'm a packet analyst. I measure throughput, round trip timers, And something we don't like to measure are mistakes. Those of you who are going to take the test and you go through incident management a lot, you're not going to be perfect. Make sure when you do your forensics, when you do your incident handling, document everything, including any mistakes. But also, we sometimes throw stuff in the trash. It was a mistake. You just got to cut that piece off of the board before you can use it, and you throw out that piece. And that's scrap work. When we can get things done with less mistakes or scrap, that's optimized. It's never perfect, right? An organization's software development department has demonstrated a consistent ability to effectively repeat their processes and documented them in a shared area. What would likely follow to further the process level of growth? Doesn't say CMM or CMMI in the question or the answers, but I can tell. It's common knowledge. They were able to repeat it, level 2. They documented them, level 3. The next step would be to take some measurements of time metrics, average throughput, time to create a patch, or from the time the patch is available to roll it out. But the answer is alpha. You must measure. I have a lot of people tell me, by the way, that CMMI shows up a lot on this exam, and it is not often explicit, just like the SDLC. These are implied. When you're reading the question, you go, oh, I know where they are. That helps you put in context. I'm an old Star Trek fan, and I use Spock and Kirk as my analysts. Spock does all the quantitative analysis. So if I'm looking at music, Spock can tell me how many notes. He can count the measures. He can tell me the tempo. He could look at the instruments. He could say there's 4 strings on that. He's quite certain. He's perfect at that, looking at objects like that. But he's not the guy to tell you if the song is good. That depends on what you feel is good in music. I always trust Spock first, and I'm doing something. I think I need science to tell me what is not true. We don't ever prove anything real necessarily, but we prove things not real. So if I think I have a really good idea, they go, no, they've already proved that not real. I go, okay, good. If they've already proved that. When you take a test, let Spock prove that it's not A or it's not C. But is it B or D? Then you just got to, let's see, I've got a couple more minutes to finish this exam, but so let me use my feelings, you know. Now, the Federation is who Star Trek protects, and I've been hearing a lot over the year that people are getting a lot of federated identity management questions. So I thought it was important to bring up who the Federation is. And you're actually getting a lot of Federation questions on this test. The ISO is the Federation. A lot of people think the ISO is an acronym, by the way, for International Standards Organization. That's what I was told. I was told wrong. No, it's a word. It comes from the Greek. It means equal. We treat each other now without bias. Around the world, we're accepting that. I don't care if you're from Afghanistan or Zimbabwe. Red light should mean stop for you, and green light means go, and there's no special treatment. Right? And we're all here to work together. Now, they certify things, Federation certified, to help us all work together. 27001 has been very testable for 15 years. It came out in 2005. It was updated in 2013, but it's the overall certification that an organization, your company or your bank could get or whatever. A technology, the common criteria like Microsoft or Cisco, they get ISO 15408 certified. And then they become a federated, trusted technology. When you pass your exam, ISO IEC 17024 is for people. And CISM and CRISC, and that's what I do. I teach 17024 exams. And identity management, federated identity management, basically means that some ISO-approved certificate authority at some level, maybe through a series of subordinates, but at some level at the top tier, the Federation trusts this is who you say you are. So now you don't have to log in to multiple servers. You provide it to some identity, like Okta, identity provider, and then they could use technologies like OpenID or SAML or whatever, WS Federation, to say, no, if they've got an ISO CA signed certificate, it must be them. This is a tough thing. We're going to see more and more, I believe, over the years. We're going to see this ISO have to go from a hierarchical certificate authority structure, I think, to a more distributed, decentralized blockchain type thing, but that's probably around the corner. All right, so why would an organization decide to migrate their asymmetric cipher suites to lattice-based algorithms to counter quantum computing attacks? Well, I don't know. Why would they do that? Asymmetric ciphers, private public key pair. Well, if I encrypt my private key, I just sign like a hash. But my public key could be used by other people to decrypt stuff from me. And they can also send me, like data encryption keys so we can store it. So public key could be a key encrypting key. The data itself is encrypted with a symmetric key. All right, so asymmetric again. That's my signing and key agreement algorithms. That's RSA, elliptical curve, and if we still got some Diffie Hellman in there. All right, is it to mitigate attacks on data encryption revealing? No, asymmetric ciphers are not used for data encryption. No. To prevent someone from calculating a collision. No, that's a hashing algorithm. It's not B. The Spock in my brain says not A, not B. And now Spock stared at the questions and Kirk stared at the clock on Spock. Where are we on question 78? Captain, insufficient data. It is not A and it is not B. Is it C or D? I don't know what RSA is, Captain. I've never been to this planet. Well, the question says quantum computing attacks. C says it's based on the difficulty of factoring the product of large primes. That may or may not be true. Hint, it is true about RSA. But that's not why. No, the D says it appears to be vulnerable to quantum. I don't care what it's based on. D tells me, hey, C may not be wrong, but D's the point. So the Kirk in me says, I have a hunch, Spock. All right. You may have noticed I'm a pretty positive guy. If you ever take any of my classes, and the reason is because I don't watch the news very much. Instead, I try to read information from very great people, very forward-thinking people, data-driven people, not just opinionated people. And that's one of the great things about AI. We're looking at big data. My wife and I were just talking. Instead of getting the opinions of this person or that person, let's get billions of people's opinions. That's what we're doing. We're collecting data. So Peter Diamandis is a big a hero of mine. I'm a member of his Abundance Digital group. This year, just before the pandemic broke out, The Future is Faster Than You Think came out. I was part of the launch team. I highly recommend you read that book, give you some positive views of the future and what this next decade is coming. It's just magical, auto-magical. And he did warn that it's not going to be without its risks. For instance, and he brought up pandemic outbreaks. But he's sorry he's right. He is happy that, COVID, if you look at it from a virus, a computer virus, like all viruses spread, you have a spreader mechanism, worm, Trojan virus, whatever. And then you have the payload. The payload of COVID is not that bad. It's bad. I don't take it lightly, but it's not as bad as it could be. But the spreader is amazing. That's what's revolutionary. All right. So Peter's book, his whole concept is that we are moving from a world of scarcity to abundance. If you shared all of the wealth of the world 50 years ago, unfortunately, we'd all be poor, but we're building more. We're developing more and more. That's not true anymore. In this decade, if you share all the wealth by 2030, we're all going to live like millionaires. It's true. Go over the numbers. Don't take my word for it. And one of my favorite people in this field, this is the age of AI. It's the new fire. And you don't want to get burnt. And Alexa and I, and I've gotten arguments all the time in Siri and stuff like that. And one my favorite book this year is by Rana Al-Kayoubi, and she's the CEO of Effectiva, and she's developed a emotive AI technology that looks at your face to help mitigate those problems. She has as I was arguing with Alexa one day, I go back and I read a chapter. And it says, "Alexa, we got to talk," and it says how much tension Alexa has added to our lives when it misunderstands us. But if it can see the look on our face. So I don't want to beat up too much, but highly, highly recommend this beautiful, beautiful story by a wonderful human being who I really think, if you know anything about AI, there's a big risk. Some people, Elon Musk, some people think it's the existential threat of our world, of our decade, that AI is going to get out of our control. It's going to become smarter than us, and people worry about the Terminator. I don't worry about the Terminator. I worry about it misunderstanding requirements. When the waiter misunderstands my requirements and I said a steak medium rare, he might think I said medium well. He's still going to bring me food. If an AI misunderstands my order, it might say, "Oh, you said medium rare? I thought you said launch nuclear bombs." So it's a lot weirder. And so by her helping AIs understand the look on our face and understand our emotions, even to the point when you try to lie, your face tells a different story. Yeah, so it's really cool. Although she doesn't want to get in the business of building lie detectors, but it will help us understand and avoid those risks. So I think she really made the world a whole bunch safer, and I'm just really, really happy that she exists and that her book came out, and I recommend you read it to you. All right, so that's it. Oh, by the way, it's such a tough time. I know. If you made it this far, you deserve something. All right, so for the next, I don't know, until this COVID's over, I don't know. How long is that going to be? I'm expecting at least a year before we move on to the new normal. Whatever the new normal is, and we're not going back. So what I've done for people who are stressed, you can't afford to pay the class, please just write sales and network defense, put in the no risk deferred payment in the subject line, let them know what class you're looking for, and I'll get you in a live online class and defer the payment for 12 months. But if after 12 months you go, "I still haven't got a job, it's still tough," don't worry about it. I'm very, very happy to have you in my class. I can't do the recordings. My wife would be very mad at me. So if you come in, I do ask that you pay $99 for the recording, or for $250, you get all the recordings. That's the silver membership. All right. Thank you very much. I hope this helped. Live long and prosper, everybody. Bye.